So quick screen share while everybody is getting situated and getting your attendance information in. I believe it was the afternoon session that Steven Sparks has been involved in, and he shared a photo of the device that he was talking about for pruning that they use sometimes. And this is outside of the realm of anything I've thought about in relation to tree work, but I could see where it has some applications. And obviously there's no place for both of your hands to be on a device like this. So just to kind of clarify that discussion and get everybody on the same page, I didn't find anything in the ANSI A300 that talked about a device like this in particular. I'll pull out the terminology here. So 6.1.1, electrical tools, except those that are self-powered, which is what this is, shall never be used in trees near an energized electrical conductor where there's a possibility of the supply cord or tool contacting the conductor. So that's, this tool is already exempt from that because it doesn't have a corded power supply. All portable electrical hand tools shall be equipped with 3-wire cord, be of double insulated type, and permanently labeled as double insulated. So I think the only part of the A300 that applies to this tool is tool operators shall use electric hand tools in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. So they kind of defer to whatever manufacturer's documentation there is for this works 20-volt Sawzall type saw.
Very interesting.
Yeah, so that was a new, I mean, I've used plenty of Sawzalls that are heavier duty, and you would hold it with 2 hands. You'd grip it up here on a larger area, up front, and then.
Well, and that looks like it has like a rotating neck on it. Like, what's this whole locking system? Is that just for storage?
No, I think that's so that you can tip the angle of the saw itself up or down.
Very interesting.
So it does have a pretty small blade that could get into tight branch crotches.
Right.
So.
Neat.
Yeah. And the
things that we learn from each other.
Yeah. I mean, you don't need any bar oil. You don't need any fuel. It's got a lot of advantages that way. How much working life you get out of a single battery is
right.
What I'm curious about. So there you go. Kind of a follow-up. Steve sent me an email after that session to elaborate a little bit on that. That's very helpful.
Hey, Graham, just a quick question too from the last lecture about the electric. Did I hear that right on the electric chainsaws, that with the wearing the chaps aren't as effective with that? Did I hear that correct?
Yeah, the electric powered saws operate at different RPMs. And so all the extensive work that goes into assigning a rating to those chainsaw chaps, that work has not been done for electric saws yet, as far as I know. So the ratings that chaps are given applies to gas powered saws. Electric ones do start and stop very quickly, but they operate at higher speeds. And so I think that's probably going to change how they design chaps for people that are using those kind of tools down the road.
Right. Graham, I'm informed that bends so that you can use it like a jigsaw.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So it'll turn 90 degrees and then you can pull it through something that's laying flat.
Yeah. I don't know if the blades, you can flip it around and be able to go forward or not. I don't know.
Yeah, they usually have kind of a pinhole style mounting if it's the same as most Sawzalls. So you could probably flip that blade around the other way, or you're just grabbing the tool differently.
Right.
Yeah, kind of interesting.
Okay, so do you have anything else?
No, if you want to get into, details on testing and all that for a bit.
Yep. So we have been setting most of you up to be prepared for sitting for the ISA exam or the NAA exam. If you have not started your application, you absolutely should start it ASAP. Please get in contact with Grammar I and we can walk you through that setup. Otherwise, if you have someone who has been watching this series with you for the most of it, but was not officially registered, you absolutely need to send us an email with that person's information, just their name, and that's pretty much all we need. We just need to have kind of a record of who has been attending, so that way we can get the count right, and also especially if they are planning to test. That's also a reason why we've had the attendance check-in, and then I can also pull the reports on who's been attending. And of course, sometimes, like I know that the iPad is Chris Lutz. There's a few of those names that we don't know. But if you have had someone watching with you for the majority of this series that was not officially registered, please send me an email with their information. Otherwise, we are hoping to have the the scholarship application for arborists to sit for the exam available within a week to a week and a half. We are waiting on some specifics to be sorted out between the university and the organizations. As far as we are aware at this time, if the scholarship is granted, it will be applied like a coupon code at your checkout. So when you go to schedule your exam and pay for it, then that's where you will apply the code that applies the scholarship. That's pretty much about all we know right now. Again, I will be communicating with everybody via email, same way that you've been getting the links, so that way you have that information. This morning, I did send out the link to the resource page at the top of the email that came from me. And so just a reminder that all of these presentations and the recordings of the afternoon sessions are on there and will be available until March 31st. Number 5 is not currently on there. It might be. Yesterday, it was not on there because when Lori showed us the Titanic scene and we tried to put it on our YouTube copyright blocked us. So our communications team is cutting that small section out of there so that way we can get that video posted. Otherwise, what's that?
We should have seen that coming.
Yeah, right. So we will stay in communication on that. We did get quite a bit of interest in hosting kind of a nonchalant test prep session. Again, we're likely going to aim for the last full week of March or possibly one of the first 2 weeks of April. And again, we'll stay in touch on that, and we might do a couple. That way you guys have an opportunity for that. If you are testing with the Pearson VUE Test Center, I highly recommend that you look into that test center to see if they're available. I recently found out that the Scottsbluff Test Center is currently closed and will not be open until July 1st due to COVID. And so kind of take that into account if you're looking at taking an ISA exam. Otherwise, we have been informed if you are looking at taking an NAA exam, as long as you are approved to sit for their exam, you can schedule an exam on your own time with their office in Milford. And so you just go in, they'll do one person, and that way you don't have to wait until this fall when they do their arborist school. as long as you, again, meet their qualifications. We're waiting to hear back in the West to see if we will be approved from ISA for a proctor for an exam late April. And I've been in communication with the arborists who indicated that they had the intent to test, and I've been working with on their applications. And so if you are in Western Nebraska or would be interested in sitting for a personal exam and closer to Western Nebraska than Milford, get a hold of me and I'll make sure that as that information comes back, I mean, it's not a guarantee right now, but we're in that process of figuring it all out. So
yeah, I will unofficially say that that's going to happen. It's just a kind of a formality that it's not official yet, but they've looked into the expense for it all, and we're getting that approved to have the chapter send somebody out west to proctor an exam. With that being said,
if you did not know, Graham is the chapter president for the Midwest ISA chapter. He's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, all that being said, anybody that's not testing, or if you're interested after you've taken the exam, we would be very interested in establishing some other proctors around the state that are available to facilitate that. So I won't name any particular names, but I see a couple people on with us today that might be a good candidate for that. So just reach out. It's a pretty simple process to be approved to be a proctor. There's an online quiz that you take. You can take it as many times as you need to, because they want to be sure that you pass that quiz with a high level of percentage correct, just to kind of show that you understand the protocol for security of the exam and all that sort of thing. So if that would be of interest to you, it would be help, particularly in states like Nebraska, where we have small population centers that are spread out a lot. Those geographic challenges can be overcome if we get a network of people that are kind of chipping in from time to time. So reach out if that is of interest.
Thank you. I don't think I have anything else to say.
Okay. And
where they can test when they, please take your exam before April 30th. Just don't procrastinate. Don't let this spring sweep you away. You've put so much effort into this course and built so much momentum. Make sure that you take an opportunity to use that information while it's fresh.
If there are circumstances beyond your control preventing you from testing soon, we'll certainly look into, Chrissy pulled on Tuesday about interest in a follow-up sort of informal review session. And we could certainly schedule something like that around your test date. If it ends up having to get, if we have to kick the rock down the road a little further and it's not going to happen right away, we will certainly help to get you back up to speed and review, however, when that time comes. So
both more than happy to do an individual session later on if we need to, anytime.
Yeah.
So
on the scholarships, I guess what I'll add there is that it was sort of an afterthought after we had started the workshops, and we want to make this as accessible for everybody as possible. And once we knew that we had some funds that could be used that way, we put the process in place, but the gears at the university level turn slowly at times. And this is kind of a new situation. So they have to scrutinize and make sure that everything's on the up and up before moving forward. So we appreciate your patience with all that, and we're excited to be able to provide that sort of assistance.
Yeah. And it's not only for ISA, it's also for NAA as well. So if you are approved to sit for that exam, a scholarship will qualify for that. Again, you will absolutely have to have your approval letter from either ISA or NAA to submit with your scholarship application to be considered for it.
Yeah.
So we're trying to make this as smooth sailing as we absolutely possibly can for anybody that's interested. We need more arborists across the state, so we're trying to use all of the tools in our gear bag to be able to make it happen for you. So, all right.
Your story. All right.
That's all. I'm off my soapbox.
Cool. Last one, guys. We've done 12 of these after this one. So it's been quite a series, and it's been great having everybody on board with it. We're talking about climbing and working in trees, of course, today. All my same comments that I gave you on Tuesday apply today as far as the level of experience that I have on these topics. They're novice, and academically I can speak to these things, and was really hoping to have somebody that had more background to share on. And it's been great having some of you that are attending these that do have contributions to share, that you did that. So thanks very much there. I do enjoy climbing trees recreationally. It's all the same safety aspects apply, but not doing any actual work while I'm aloft. My daughter's now 9, and she's been doing a bit of it with me also, and enjoys that a lot. So the structure of this follows the book. So they get right into gear inspection first. I've got the link down below at the bottom of the slide here. Petzl is one of the major manufacturers of a lot of climbing gear, and they have some really good resources available on their website. And so I pulled an image from their website showing what some of the damage you'd be looking for in your gear inspection looks like. These are things that would warrant either replacing a part or tossing the entire piece of gear, whatever gear you're looking at. Climbing saddles, of course, are the piece of equipment that attaches to your body that then provides a connection point to the line that goes up into the tree. It's important to label on the saddle somewhere when you started putting it into service, and sort of tracking how long you've had it in service. That's another important piece of data to consider when you're inspecting your gear. There are some different styles of saddle bridge. The saddle bridge is the component that's right in front of your belly button that ties into the climbing line from the saddle. And there are different styles of those saddle bridge that are more and less compatible with different lanyards and carabiners. And so it's important to work with either the distributor that you're purchasing from or an experienced arborist to ensure that those compatibilities are in place. It's not a situation where if you make the wrong choice, everything's just going to come apart and you're going to take a ride out of the tree. But it does have implications for how much wear and tear occurs at that connection point. You're going to want to look at all the stitching, webbing, and metal hardware involved in your saddle. For production work, you're going to have a lot of tie-in points, not just for yourself, but for other pieces of equipment that you'll take up in the tree with you. And so depending on what type of saddle you have, there's stitching in different places and metal components that you want to check for wear. If they're starting to crack or bend or anything like that, that's definitely a situation where they need to be replaced. And then it's also worth, every once in a while, it's worth checking your crew members' gear. You know, both of you switch off and look at each other's equipment so that you get a fresh set of eyes on everything, because sometimes we can miss things or go through that inspection process a little too quickly because we've done it so many times with our own equipment that it's good to have somebody else check your stuff periodically. When we're looking at carabiners, there's a tensile strength rating, and the ANSI standard for that starts at 5,000 pounds of tensile strength. We want a carabiner that is a gated and locking style. There are more simple carabiners out there that are acceptable for accessories and, tying, connecting your chainsaw lanyard to your saddle, for example. You may not know this, you saw him last week, but Drake is actually a huge fan of arboriculture. And so he is going to show us a little bit on carabiners too. These are the style that we're going to avoid using for a tie-in point for ourselves when we're climbing. These are perfectly good carabiners to use for other applications, but they are not designed to be a tie-in point that you are putting your health and your life in the hands of. So these are great for accessory lanyards, things of that nature. If you have any smaller carabiners that are kind of promotional and kind of giveaways that you might encounter, sometimes they come attached to water bottles and things like that. They're usually rated that they're not for, there's printing on them that says that they're not intended for that sort of use, and that's common sense, but still probably worth mentioning that anything that isn't sold by a supplier for climbing hardware should be avoided. If you have any doubts, just do not use it for any of these kind of purposes. And some of them can look really fancy, like they are designed to be used for a tie-in point on your saddle, but they are not in fact for that purpose. So these have a gate. Every carabiner has a gate that allows for rope to pass through and come into the interior of the carabiner. So in all these cases, these gates simply are spring loaded and they can pull open very easily. And this is just a recipe for disaster, using those to support your weight when you're aloft in a tree. So there are a number of different styles that are more of a locking style. If they have a gate that has a threaded sort of screw type lock to them, those are also more appropriate for rigging than they are for supporting you in the tree. But I'm not sure whether or not those are an absolute do not use as a tie-in point or not recommended. But any that have two, sometimes they'll have three modes of action in order to disengage them. So in this case, you have often there's sort of like a ball that you'll pinch in order to allow to twist the gate and open it. But having two or three different modes of movement in order for that to occur is an important safety feature, so that if that gate presses up against a branch up in the tree or something along those lines, it's not going to open when you don't intend it to. For climbing line, the general standard is we're looking for at least 1/2 inch diameter on that rope. 12.6 millimeter is the equivalent in metric. There are some exceptions to that, but generally 1/2 inch line is the standard for anything that you're using to get yourself up into the tree. You're going to want to look for any sort of points along the rope where the diameter narrows. That's a sign that the core has potentially tore either partially or completely, and that's obviously a really weak point in the rope. If you've nicked your rope with a saw of some sort, then oftentimes the core can puff out of that tear. Or if you have any kind of fraying, the other thing you might watch for is friction burn on the rope from having lots of weight or running across a branch crotch, and the heat of that friction, in some cases melting the synthetic fibers that the rope is made of. The same inspection applies to any of your lanyards, prussiks, or split tails that you're using to climb up in the tree. These are all rope related components. So for rope, there are a couple different factors at play that determine what's most appropriate for different situations. These different types of rope have different strength. Some of them are going to stretch more when they're loaded, and some of them are going to have different degrees of durability under wear and tear, which is obviously happening over the course of doing tree work over the weeks and months and years that you have that rope in service. So 3-strand rope, this has been used for a long time, long before we even had synthetic fibers for rope. You think of the hemp manila twist that's used in nautical, boats and things of that nature. That's been around a long time. It doesn't have a lot of strength, and it does stretch a lot. So this can cause the twisted nature of the rope to undo. And if you have something hanging from rope that's under tension like this and twisted, then that whatever is hanging from that rope is going to tend to want to rotate as the rope sort of goes back to its original state with the twist that's in place there. But it is still relevant for different applications in tree work. Pictured here is Tree Master by Sampson. Part of why I put these photos in here is to show that they don't all look very different from each other on the outside. And so it's important to understand the differences, because you're not going to be able to pick up a hawk of rope and necessarily be able to tell right away what type of rope you're looking at until you have a little bit more experience with them. And they, all the different manufacturers of these ropes have their own different colors that they use, and the colors themselves don't necessarily indicate anything or give you useful information. They're more useful for telling the ropes apart when you're working in the tree already, and you know which one is your rigging rope, which one is your climbing line. Differentiating them from each other is mostly what the color coding is all about. So with 16-strand, you have something that's much more durable. It has a core to it, and then the outer cover, which is the colored fibers that you see. And as the notes say, this is much more of a static rope that's going to keep more or less the same shape and length to it when it's loaded. Sometimes that stretch is important when we're doing rigging, though. We don't necessarily want, as we cut a branch out of a tree and we have it attached to a rigging line, we don't necessarily want that to just lock up really quickly as soon as we put some wraps around the tree and stop that branch from coming all the way to the ground. And that elongation can help in those kind of situations. So elongation isn't bad, it's just meant for certain things and not others. The 24-strand is also called double braid. This is where we also have a core interior and then a cover on the outside. In this case, they are equally sharing the load that's applied. So it's not ideal for rigging through natural branch crotches. 12-strand is more ideal for that because it's going to react better to being run over a branch and back down, and then supporting some amount of weight. And here's kind of what the interior of some of those look like. Another term that the book uses is cycles to failure. Just like anything else, you have light switches in your house, you flick that switch thousands and thousands of times, and eventually it's just going to break. And you're not always going to know when, and it's probably a little bit more variable with electronics. So I don't know how great of an example that is, but there are formulas that are used to estimate how many times can you load that rope with some minimum threshold of weight before that rope is likely to fail. The working load limit is a part of that formula, and usually a rope is weighted for anywhere from 10 to 15 times the weight that you will actually be using that rope for. And then the design factor is where we're taking the tensile strength rating of the rope, dividing it by the working load limit. And we typically want to see that final number of the design factor about 5 times or greater what we're actually using it for. On knots, don't get too caught up in how these are tied and what they look like. For the exam, what's important is that you know what applications each of these knots have, and you'll get 2, maybe 3 questions about knots. It's not a significant part of the exam, partially, I would guess, because it's so difficult to really test people's knowledge about this without handing them a piece of rope or 2 and asking them to demonstrate what that looks like. So the ISA exam is not about job skills training. It's about the underlying concepts behind each of the knots and when you use them. Taut line hitch, these first couple are hitches that are used to connect you to the climbing line. So a hitch is a term that's used to refer to a rope that's not necessarily knotted around another rope, but it's wrapped in such a way that when, in this case, we're looking at blue and orange rope in all the diagrams, the orange climbing line that you have in place is has a hitch wrapped around it, and when your body weight, in this case, is pulling on this hitch, that is going to constrict around the climbing line and create friction that holds it in place. So as you ascend the tree and you take your weight off of this hitch periodically, then by grabbing the bottom of that hitch, you can advance it up the orange line and set it at a higher point and then put your weight back on it again. So think of sort of this inchworm style where you're moving one hitch and then another, so that you always have 2 tie-in points to the climbing line. If one or the other were to fail, you're not going to come out of the tree. And so at any one time, you're advancing one or the other in an inchworm sort of fashion. With all these knots, it's very important that they're dressed properly. You'll see terminology about rolling out, and this is where, if we don't take most of the slack out of this hitch before we load it, then it's not properly dressed and it's not going to react the way we want it to. And then because we have a tail off of that hitch, we want to have a figure 8 knot in there to arrest that rope if unraveling were to occur for some reason. So if you just a little bit of trivia here, I don't think you'll be tested over anything like this, but if there's an important proportion between the diameter of the orange line and the diameter of the blue line. And if there's too much difference between those two, then your hitch is going to secure too tightly around the climbing line, and it's going to be a problem as you're ascending or descending the tree, particularly. So you want to have not a lot of difference. You don't want a really small hitch in diameter compared to the climbing line. There's something in the chat, Chrissy?
Me. I was telling everybody my email.
Great. All right. I don't think I have much else to add there. So what I've actually had happen to me when I was using a prussik with a hitch like this that was too small in diameter is it's very hard to loosen this hitch when it comes time to descend that rope. So you have to kind of pull this bridge that comes across that towards your blue working end of the line in order to loosen that enough so that you can slowly descend out of the tree. The other thing that can happen when this diameter of the blue line is too small compared to your climbing line is you'll create more heat and friction as you do descend that line, and it can cause wear that makes your ropes unserviceable and not safe to use very quickly. Blake's hitch is very similar here. It maintains more uniform friction is what's listed here, and doesn't have the same tendency to roll out. And the differences between these knots are very subtle until you start to use one or the other for a while and get comfortable with how they respond. Yeah, stays dressed and set better. Doesn't roll out, higher tendency to glaze on a long or rapid descent. So that's what I mentioned earlier. If you're way up in a tree, 50, 60 feet, when you take some of the tension out of this hitch, the hitch is still grabbing the climbing line, but it's not grabbing it strongly enough to keep you held in place. And so you're slowly coming down out of that tree, and there's a lot of heat produced by that friction that you're working against. Figure 8 knots are pretty common sense, where most of us have encountered knots like this before, and it's just a nice, easy to tie knot to put on the very end of a rope as a safety feature. There are also safety knots that you can apply in the middle of a rope, tying the rope to itself in a midway point as you go up the tree, so that knot could potentially catch you on your way down if something bad happened. Bolin, this is a strong knot for forming a loop, as it says. This is if you want to use, I don't know all the applications that this is good for, but it's not something that you want to use to put a carabiner on. This is likely going to tighten down on that carabiner and cause problems for you.
Graham, I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you have to be tied onto the climbing line at all times while you are in the tree? How would you bypass a limb?
What was the last part there?
Bypass a limb.
Oh yeah, so we'll get to that in a little bit. Sometimes you'll be using a combination of lanyards. So you have two different tie-in points that you can alternate between. So you ascend the tree if you're coming around the trunk instead of setting a line high up in the tree, then you'll have two lanyards that you can alternate between. So one's holding you in place, the other one you're disengaging, flipping it over the branch that's in your way, and then disengaging the one that you were attached to before and getting across a branch that way.
So to answer the first question, yes, you do have to be tied onto a climbing line at all times while you're in the tree.
Yeah. 3 points of attachment. We'll get to that in a little bit. Girth hitches, as the diagram describes, these are a nice, simple way to attach rope to a branch that you're going to take out and prune out of the tree. This isn't a tie-in point sort of thing, because you're not going to be able to easily install this hitch from the ground before you get up in the tree. This is something that you're tying around after you're already aloft, and you're usually setting up a rigging line. Running Bolin functions as a slip knot. So this is where you use a Bolin to bring the working end of the rope back through that loop, and then it's just going to cinch down on the branch with its own weight. And this is a knot, as it says here. After you've loaded this knot, it's not going to be really difficult to undo and then apply again to another branch. This midline clove hitch is similar to the safety knot I mentioned that you can do in the midpoint of a rope, and just a real simple, easy way to attach a piece of gear that a climber needs so that they don't have to come all the way back out of the tree to get something that they either forgot or didn't need at first. I've never used an end line clove hitch. So just like I said on Tuesday, if anybody's got more specifics on any of these, how you use them, problems that you've encountered with one knot or another, feel free to share with everybody else here. Easy to tie is always good. there's plenty of other things that we have to be keeping in mind as we're doing tree work. So any sort of hitch or knot that's going to be easy to do over and over again without giving a lot of thought to it, but still obviously tying it appropriately, dressing it before you load it or move on to something else. That's really helpful. What's it say here? Used to tie off limbs or sections of wood may roll out if not adequately backed up. Slip knots, as it says, this isn't a particular kind of knot as much as a configuration. The knot known as a slip knot is a slipped overhand knot. So you can use this to redirect a rope, create a point to run another line through potentially, but it is going to tighten once you load it. Sheet bend. This is where, for various reasons, you might need to add more length to a rope. This is not obviously going to be good if you need this bend to run through a branch crotch. That's obviously going to hang up in narrow points. Double fisherman's knot is sometimes used for your prussik itself. You can see a double fisherman's in this prussik down below here, where we're just tying the two ends of a single short length of rope together in order to create a closed loop that has friction on itself. But it can also be used to connect two separate lines, as the name implies. This is the same sort of thing that you're doing when you're fishing to attach a lure of some sort that has a short length of line attached to it to the fishing line that's already in on your pole. And that sounds like someone that totally doesn't fish at all, so you know that much about me. Prussik is just, you're going to use it all the time. This is that friction hitch that you use to connect your body and your saddle to the climbing line. This says bidirectional in some applications. I'm not sure exactly what they mean by that, because as I described earlier, if it were bidirectional, then it would not be something that we could advance along the line. So if you had an application where you wanted that hitch to be static and held in place without being able to advance one way or another, then there's probably ways that you could do that. So this does talk about a smaller diameter rope used to attach to the prussik. Just be wary of having that difference between diameters of the two ropes, having too much difference there. And we'll talk about the secured foot lock in a little bit as it relates to the prussik. Now I'm getting way out of my element with the hitches and the knots. I don't have any rigging experience, but a cow hitch, this is where we're just attaching a short rope with a block or pulley to it as a redirect point or a tie-in point above for a rigging line to bring a branch out of the tree. The timber hitch, these wraps here are really important. This adds more integrity and stability to the rope and prevents rolling out. So you want that to have a few twists to it that are going to encourage the rope to stay put as you put lots of weight on that block and pulley. This hitch is most secured when tied on larger pieces and when the pole is always at 90 degrees. So straight down is, loading a hitch like this straight down is really key for some reason. So this is a really common setup that I've seen but never used. Basically, you have your block and your cow hitch below your cut, and then you have your rigging line attached to the piece that's coming out of the tree. It's worth noting that this notch was cut out of the leader prior to this rope being installed, obviously to minimize the likelihood of your chainsaw nicking or cutting all the way through the rigging line. And then after you have your notch in place, you set up this rigging line on the notched side for two reasons. One, of course, because then our back cut doesn't have all that rope in our way. And also because the notch is the direction that we're taking this leader out. And so as it comes out of the tree, the block is on the same side as the piece that's being pruned out. Yeah. So real quick and dirty on the knots there. Again, you won't have a lot of exam questions about those knots. Just familiarize yourself with their applications. And the book does go into a little bit more depth on what those different scenarios are and what's the most appropriate. Chrissy, just a quick check. My toolbars aren't interfering with my screen share, are they?
Nope.
Okay.
Quick note, I just got the email confirmation that test in Scottsbluff on April 21st at the Panhandle Research and Extension Center starting at 8:30 a.m. has been approved, and it is posted on the ISA website. Again, though, if you have intentions to apply for the scholarship, you will want to wait until you get your code to apply that at the time that you select that date, location, and do your checkout.
Nice, that's a great update. So if you haven't let us know already that you intend to apply for that scholarship, please at least do that while we get the rest of the details sorted out so that we can stay in touch with you about it. But we'll still get the details out to everybody that's registered.
Right. You can send me a private chat and that'll save. Just say like, I will apply for the scholarship, or I intend to apply for the scholarship.
So we talked a little bit about work plans and job briefings on Tuesday. And of course, we're revisiting those topics because they have not only safety applications, but also they're important for the work that's actually being done in the tree. So part of that work plan is looking for any job site hazards and, the same safety stuff that we talked about already. You're also going to want to discuss with the entire crew what sort of gear you're going to be using, which, if you're removing the tree, which branches are coming out first. There's usually some logic to what order that's done in. You want to be looking for any dead or broken branches in the tree, cracks, signs of decay, all the things that had safety concerns before, obviously are important considerations for the work being done well as having it done safely. Also good to check the root crown, look around the flare of the roots, those buttress roots that come down into the soil. If there's significant decay to those, obviously that has implications for rigging large branches out of the tree. It may not be, unless there's really significant root crown decay, I don't think it's real likely that your 150 to 250 pounds of weight is going to make the difference between the tree failing. But as you start to use the tree to take other parts of it out, there's a lot of, the force acting on that root crown can exponentially increase. So you may want to take smaller picks as you're pruning branches out of the tree in a removal process. It's also good in this job briefing to plan how you're going to get into the tree, move through the tree, and then get back out at the end. So assessing your tie-in points. The pull test isn't something you'll be doing during the job briefing because this is after you've already established a plan and you're preparing to get into the tree. But once you have a tie-in point established, you can do some pull tests to ensure that you've got a strong tie-in point to use. There's not a lot of, I don't know of any real fancy way of doing that other than you and maybe a second person just loading that rope well to test the strength of your tie-in point, because there's a lot that you can't really see from the ground until you're up in the tree. So there's a number of different tools for getting into the tree. We talked about a little bit on Tuesday. Spurs, as we mentioned, are only used for removal work. They have a single spike on the inside of your foot that bites into the tree and gives you a secure point so that your feet aren't slipping down the trunk. And this creates damage to the trunk of the tree that is definitely unnecessary if the tree isn't going to be removed. The ISA manual lists ladders as an appropriate way to get in the tree. It is still not something that is approved for doing tree work on, but as a simple access point up into smaller trees, it looks like ladders are an acceptable tool for that sort of, just for getting into the tree initially. And then of course your climbing rope and throw line are the third way that you would get into the tree. Throw line and climbing rope are of course different. I don't have a picture of a throw line in here, but it's much smaller cord that will have a weighted bag attached to the end so that you can throw that up, get it through the, establish your tie-in point, and then you'll attach your climbing line to that throw line and pull that up through. So if you're using rope to ascend the tree, what's often used is a friction saver here, or a false crotch, it's called as well. And I don't have a diagram of it, but it's pretty slick how you can actually install this strap up over a branch, just using that throw line that's already in place, and then use these rings that are on the ends of that strap to actually bring your climbing line through. So there's going to be less heat and friction from that rope running through those metal rings compared to going up over the crotch of a tree that has a lot of thick bark to it that's going to cause extra wear on your climbing line, create more friction than you might want to have in place. And in some cases, when that rope that's going over a branch crotch is rubbing over and over again, that can actually damage that live cambium layer underneath the bark of that branch. So kind of common sense that we would access a tree on the opposite side of any energized lines if we can. As I mentioned earlier, as you ascend the tree, you want to be looking around for any hazards that weren't obvious to you when you first started your ascent. You want to have 2 tie-in points at all time, and to add to that, 3 points of attachment. So the difference here is that with 2 tie-in points, as Chrissy asked earlier, how do we, if we're using a lanyard, then you have 2 places that you're making contact with the tree at all times. But whether it's a climbing line and a foot and a lanyard, having 3 points of attachment, just touching the tree in 2 or 3 spots gives you the stability that you need. So for climbing lines, you can do that with a foot lock. If you have a climbing line that's just hanging in the middle of nowhere without being right nearby the trunk of the tree, where you can, have your feet, attached to the trunk, you're basically bringing the rope up over your boot with the other boot and stomping down on it to create a point of attachment down below. And then with your hand here, you are advancing that prussik upwards so that you can then sit down on that prussik again with your body weight, and you're a couple feet further up the rope. With a body thrust, that's where you're doing something very similar as far as advancing a prussik. but you are sort of moving up the tree with a thrusting motion where you're able to get your feet firmly in place and push against the tree or some other object. Most of the time for climbing line ascents, that's being done with not necessarily a double rope technique, but where you are the rope itself is moving as you ascend the tree. But this single rope system or static rope system, it's called sometimes, the rope does not move as you ascend, and so it creates less friction on the rope, more efficiency with how quickly you ascend, and reducing how much energy it takes to ascend the tree as well. SRT or SRS is often used with ascenders where you have mechanical devices that secure around the rope and act the same way that a prussik would, by providing tension that stops you from descending on the rope when your body weight acts on it, but is able to be advanced up the rope when it's not being loaded. So in this case, you have a hand ascender that's attached to a foot loop so that you can put your weight on this loop when you want this hand ascender to be supporting your weight. And then with a small, the name of this is escaping me, well, it's a foot ascender, but there's another word for it. A pantene, I think in some cases. This can be your alternative point of loading that holds your weight in place. And if you have a harness, a chest harness in place, then you can even have a third point of attachment that will not descend the rope when your body weight is acting on it. And there's a number of different systems out here. They have their own proprietary names that speak to a configuration of ascenders that are being used. And I don't know that any of them are more safe or more effective. They're all just different configurations that people have their own personal preference for. For tie-in points, it's important that we're not using any really narrow branch crotches that are going to increase the friction on the rope, envelop the rope more fully, and have the potential to bind up and not advance as we're trying to move that rope through the crotch. Another good reason to have those friction savers in place, like we see here, even though this climber doesn't have a tie-in point that's high enough in order to maintain tension on the line, you can see how these friction savers provide a superior tie-in point to what you might have in that branch crotch above the union. Another important point here is that when you establish these tie-in points, the working end of the line is good to have sort of come around the trunk a bit. I'm struggling to describe this accurately, but you want that line to have the ability to catch on another branch. If you have a failure of your tie-in point above, then your climbing line has, it's not going to wrap around the trunk of the tree entirely, or certainly not multiple times, because that's going to create friction that stops you from falling, stops the rope from moving as well. But there are ways to do this where you have, another fail safe for something happening while you're aloft. And then that figure 8 stopper knot that we saw earlier is always key whenever we have a tail to our working climbing line that just terminates at a point. So it creates that location where if the line starts to come out of this friction saver, we have a knot at the end there that's going to stop at some point. This is a diagram of a split tail and micro pulley setup. It's not all that different from other climbing systems we've seen so far, but this orange line here shows that we have 2 tie-in points onto our harness, our saddle, and then there's a small micro pulley that's attached. And the purpose of this micro pulley is to tend the prussik as you ascend. So when you are able to advance up the blue line, the pulley is going to automatically advance the prussik itself. So if you're foot locking and your boots are creating a tie-in point below the pulley here on this blue line, and then you stand up on that foot lock, then as you stand up and advance upwards, this micro pulley is going to move the bottom of this orange prussik further up the blue line for you without you having to grab the prussik and pull it up as you go. You can also grab the tail end of your blue line and pull up on it, and the micro pulley is going to do the same sort of thing in that case. So this is really helpful when you're doing technical work in a tree where you're needing to access a part of a branch that's way out towards the end. You're going to be doing any kind of limb walking. It's good to have a pulley that's tending that prussik for you automatically to simplify the things that you're having to keep track of as you go. But when you're doing any kind of limb walking, 2 things that are important is that you orient yourself either backwards or sideways so that you are oriented towards the trunk of the tree. If you lose your balance and you take a swing out of that branch, you still have your tie-in point above, but you are oriented in the direction that you're swinging if that happens. They mentioned sideways also because it's just a more stable way to have your feet on the branch that you're standing on. The other important point with limb walking is that you're going to tend your climbing line to keep tension on the line at all times so that you don't have a situation like this where you're out on a limb, literally, and your climbing line is slack and your legs and your balance are the only thing keeping you in place well. So in this case, we don't have a third point of contact anymore because there's no tension on this climbing line. But over here, we have 1 foot and another foot and the climbing line, 3 points of attachment in the tree. The same way you wouldn't want to sit on a stool with only two legs to it. You want at least 3, if not 4, to create a stable thing, piece of furniture to sit on. Swing positioning. This is where every once in a while, and as your comfort level increases with climbing, you may find that you are okay with the idea of going from one branch to another by swinging on your climbing line and temporarily only having that single point of attachment in your climbing line itself. I don't do any of that. I'm not comfortable enough with climbing, so I can't tell you much about how that's done safely, other than, like I mentioned, with the culture of safety point in general. Don't take big swings just to impress your buddies. If it's not something that you're comfortable with, better safe than sorry in all these cases. But in the interest of efficiency, as you're comfortable with it, you can go from one branch to another with short swings from your climbing line. Aerial rescue, this is where you are getting better understanding and hopefully some training and some practice in how to help a crew member that might be aloft in a tree and unable to descend and get first aid or medical care for something that happened. This was a great point that I hadn't thought of before I was reviewing the manual to put this presentation together. But if you are doing tree work that involves somebody climbing the tree on a rope, then you need a separate person that is not climbing the tree with a complete set of climbing gear available to them in order for aerial rescue to even be an option. If you have a crew that just has one competent climber on it and other people that only do groundwork and have never climbed a tree or aren't comfortable and competent doing that, then your climber is virtually alone and you don't have a lot of options if something happens while they're up in the tree. So it's makes perfect sense, but something I never really thought about completely until I read that again and thought about the implications there. So if you're doing climbing work on a crew, you don't need just one climber, you need two climbers, and they can't both be climbing the tree. Or I suppose you probably could have that second climber aloft as well. The likelihood of something happening to both of them in a short period of time isn't great, other than some sort of energized line event or a full tree failure. But that's worth mentioning. In some cases, on the work truck, you will have a rescue kit and an access line is separate there. But the rescue kit would be a dedicated climbing setup that is not used for production work. So it doesn't need to be inspected because it's not being used regularly. It's in perfect working condition, inspected periodically. We're not borrowing parts from it to use for just getting work done. This is equipment that's only for rescue. The access line is where a tree climber will get aloft in the tree, and then they will set up another rope that is also just dedicated to access to the tree for someone that might need to come aloft and perform an aerial rescue. So with serious medical events, as Dean mentioned, as I've mentioned, timing is everything. And sometimes you have minutes to make a difference between mitigating serious injury or death versus somebody coming out of an event with considerably less problems down the road, injuries, things of that nature. So having that access line in place usually doesn't take a lot of extra work or time because you've already got a tie-in point. You get aloft in the tree. It's usually pretty easy to pull another rope up, get it in a secure tie-in location, and just have that there for if it's needed. And it can really save a lot of time when you think about trying to set another climbing line after some sort of serious injury has already occurred. It's also worth noting that if you have spikes or spurs available to you and somebody has been injured seriously when they're up in the tree, use those spurs to get to that person as quick as possible. Just because it's not ideal for the tree doesn't mean that you shouldn't consider using them in an emergency situation. So that's another option, either in conjunction with an access line or instead of. That would be another alternative that you have available to you in order to get to that injured person as quickly as you can.
Hey, Graham, we have a question.
Yeah.
Philip, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yes, Graham, I have a question in regards to that picture where the lady's letting that gentleman out or that dummy out of the tree. And your rescue kits on the truck, do they have dorsal D rings then to do that?
What was the last part? Do they have what?
Dorsal D rings, because it looks like she's connected, or that picture shows a dorsal D ring. So are there tree climbing harnesses that have dorsal D rings?
Yeah, I think some of the older, like I have an old saddle that I don't climb in anymore, but the bridge for the saddle does have a D style ring to it where
in the back?
On the front.
On the front? But that one looks like it's on the back.
On the back. This picture here?
I see. He's been over backwards.
Yeah, that's just a dummy, but yeah, it does look kind of like he's bending over forwards. But if you look at the boots on there.
Yep, I just caught that.
Yeah, but I think go ahead.
No, it's just I'm accustomed to having a D-ring on the back, on my back in my climbing gear on that I used to climb a lot.
Yeah,
And
with chest harnesses, sometimes that you can have a tie-in point on the back there. And certainly, you know, if
that
you,
relieves a lot of stress on the back. I mean,
yeah,
being bent over that way is not the best.
right. But in, yeah,
In emergency, it doesn't make any difference. Get them to the ground.
of course. Yeah. And it looks like this dummy does have a chest harness, and there probably is a connection point, but the ANSI A300 standard doesn't allow for any chest harnesses that I know of that have a connection point that's not at your waist.
Okay.
But that I could be wrong there again. I get out of my depth pretty quickly with some of these topics here, and so it's always good to hear from others that have experience to share there. It's interesting to think about those different configurations.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet, Philip. Thanks for chiming in. The same picture that Philip was talking about is well, I mean, both of these pictures are demonstrating practice for aerial rescue. If you're waiting to do aerial rescue when it's really important, you're not going to do it very competently, and practice really does make a big difference if an event actually occurs. And so this would be a good point to mention that at the ISA chapter level, some of you are aware that there's an international tree climbing competition every year that was canceled last year with the coronavirus pandemic. The international tree climbing competition is canceled again for this year for the same reason. But rather than canceling our regional climbing competition, we are going to have a non-qualifying event of some sort that will most likely be in Wichita in June, because it is still important that climbers have an opportunity to practice these things. And it doesn't require ISA putting together an event for that to happen, but as an organization, it is important that we provide for some opportunities for climbers to be able to practice aerial rescue and practice ascent and talk to colleagues in the industry about how they do things in order to refine their practices and their effectiveness. So if you are already a certified arborist with ISA and a member of the chapter, then you'll get that kind of information. Otherwise, you can certainly monitor the Midwest ISA chapter website for more information on that. We're still finalizing details, but we're looking at a June 12th date in Wichita right now for a full tree climbing competition event that it's not a qualifying event, but we're going to run it exactly the same way so that climbers can participate, network with each other, and have kind of a fun event around this climbing competition. Anything in the chat here? What are some programs that take free trees? Justin, I might need a little more detail from you on that. Some programs that take, so you have some trees to offer? Is that it? I'll let you go in the chat if that's better. And okay, so you're going to have some trees available. Chrissy and I can certainly work to get you connected with some folks that would be interested in those. Did you have something to add, Chrissy?
No, I was just gonna say, Justin, I see that you're unmuted, but we cannot hear you. So.
Okay. Yeah. Tree planting is always near and dear to our hearts, and probably everybody attending as well. So if you've got trees to offer at some point, we can do our best to connect you with folks that would plant them and give them a good home. Thanks, Justin. So for aerial rescue, if aerial rescue is required because of an energized line event where electricity is probably still in play, do not take any steps to figure out whether the line is live or not. Do not take any steps to ascend the tree. Even climbing line itself can be energized. The tree itself can be energized, the person you're trying to save. So an electrocution event is the one case where you're going to not make any steps to intervene with an aerial rescue. You're going to call emergency services and the appropriate utility in order to get that power shut off as quickly as possible and get emergency personnel to come in and take over, because that's a different situation entirely. If we have just more of a physical injury event, or if somebody has some sort of cardiovascular event while they're up in the tree, things like that, then you're still gonna get your 911 call in place as quickly as possible, or assign somebody else to do that so that you can begin your aerial rescue as quick as possible. As you get aloft, you're gonna assess why the event happened, what caused the event, stay in communication with the victim if they're conscious, and you're gonna move quickly, but safely and prudently. So you're not gonna take further risks in order to make things happen a little faster. You still need to protect yourself from becoming another victim in the scenario. The book goes into much greater depth on these different scenarios, just like they did with first aid. So I don't want to get into a situation where I might be describing steps inappropriately or inaccurately. Dean, do you have anything to add on? I'm sure you probably don't have any aerial rescue background, but any other general, first responder type words of wisdom to share?
Well, again, just to reiterate, that's important to know your address and where you're at, so you can, if you have to notify 911, that they can get there. A lot of times when you get in situations, people, they're out in an area where there's no addresses, but have some sort of idea what your location's at, so you can notify first responders. The other thing too, I've not had any experience in rope rescue in trees. I had one with a building one time on a roof. The main thing too is always important to always have a good sharp knife on you, or cutting device, scissors or something in your kit, because when you get them down, as you can tell, a lot of times you have a lot of stuff on their clothing. You have to cut them away, or even your ropes and different things to get them prepared, to get them support transport before EMS arrives. So yeah, that's the main thing I'd like to just add, but I just cannot reiterate that enough. Know your location, where you're at when you have to notify if there is an emergency.
Perfect. And
this is Philip again. Sometimes in our job safety briefing, if we didn't have a physical address, we'd list GPS locations.
Perfect. And
yes, that's excellent too. That's excellent.
And that's with smartphones being so prevalent, that's easier and easier to do these days. Get some sort of coordinates that, even a cell phone can approximate the location you're in within about 20 feet. So that's all the specificity that a first responder is going to need to get to you. And they're not a couple blocks away wondering where you are, looking in every tree that's around. So great point, Philip, on getting some coordinates if you're working on a county road or something like that, where you don't have a residential address to get as specific as you need. That's great. Was that all you had? Yeah, it looks like you put yourself back on mute. The ISA manual does list a sharp knife as part of that rescue kit as well. So that was a good point as well, Dean, because there are lots of polyester webbing, rope, things like that may or may not need to be taken out of the picture quickly in order to make that descent once you've gotten up into the tree and are nearby the victim.
Well, and the other thing too, is just that part about keeping calm and remember, no harm to yourself if you're the rescuer, because that's one thing that's a real mess. If then you have more than one you got to deal with. So always recognize scene safety, look it over very well before you attempt a rescue, and again, keep calm, but you got to take care of yourself. You're no good if you get injured up there too.
Yeah, yeah. You've compromised how much damage the person that's already hurt might incur if you hurt yourself in the process also, and complicate the situation. So you want to move quickly but safely, and stay calm. And watching these aerial rescues is fun. I did have a coworker who was disqualified from an aerial rescue competition one time. When you compete in aerial rescue, you typically get 2 attempts, and you are ascending a tree, getting to the dummy, doing a handful of procedures while you're up there that simulate what you would do with an actual person, and then bringing them back down to the ground safely. And in this case, the individual had gotten a really good time on their first attempt, and so they wanted to be real cute with the second one, and they rode the dummy down like a surfboard at the end, and got disqualified from the event entirely for, not taking their second attempt seriously and trying to get a chuckle out of everybody. So it is fun and important to practice aerial rescue, but it's still something that we have to approach in earnest.
Just another quick thing too, that people just don't realize, but this is what they call the dead weight of the person that's unconscious. It's just something hard to describe when you're trying. I can imagine just trying to deal with that up in a tree. So that's another expectation that really surprises people. So
yeah, and so this woman in the picture here is going to it's going to be a lot of work even to pull that person laterally towards them, even though the rope is supporting their weight. You have a lot of weight even just pulling them sideways towards you, so that you can change their tie-in points and descend together. That's another good point, Dean. Rigging. Like I said, I don't have a lot of experience here. The book lays out a lot of terminology that you can bone up on a bit for the exam. I'm gonna go over this real briefly here, and then we'll wrap up this presentation. So as you guys already probably know, rigging is where we're attaching rope to parts of the tree that are coming out, so that we can have more control over the position that they're in, which direction that they fall, how quickly they come down to the ground, so that we are maintaining control over those big heavy parts as they come out of the tree. There are different points on a tree that are acceptable for rigging. There are rules of thumb for how strong of a tie-in point you need in relation to the size piece that you're taking out. This ties back into the notion of not trying to be a hero and take really big picks, when it would be more appropriate and more safe to make a few extra cuts and take the tree out in more pieces. Bollards are a tie-in point at the ground for a rigging line that provide friction for the rigging line, so that a single individual can have control over pieces of wood that are hundreds and sometimes thousands of pounds, and still be able to control that with just a single individual. So the more wraps that you put around this bollard, the more friction on the rope, and the more control that person on the ground has as that piece comes free from the rest of the tree. Rigging blocks are pulley systems. They're not all mechanical advantages, but they can be combined together to create a mechanical advantage that multiplies the amount of force that you can pull on that rope to lift something out of the way or hold it in place. Even just a single rigging block sometimes is used in order to create a low friction point of attachment. This was something the book mentioned that I wasn't aware of. For doing rigging for trees and tree parts, you're going to want a rigging block that has bushings instead of bearings. Bearings are more efficient and smooth for rescue purposes, but bearings also get dirty and clogged with debris, pieces of bark, sawdust, things like that. So they're problematic for using day after day for tree parts, but some tree crews will have a block of some sort in place for rescue purposes that's more of a bearing style instead. And then webbing slings, sometimes these are called whoopee slings. They are color coded based on weight ratings that they've been given. They have different thicknesses and widths, and they're designed for different amounts of weight. And so the color coding does a good job of ensuring that visually you can double check that you're using a proper sling for whatever application you have up in the tree. They're also by design constructed in a flat orientation so that they don't roll easily. They stay in place better than a round rope would that could potentially roll down a branch once it's loaded. So that's what I got for you on working in trees. It's, just skimming the surface of the whole topic. And that's really all that ISA is asking from you on the exam. As I might have mentioned in a previous workshop with you guys, arborist certification is really the beginning of the journey. It's not it's not the finish line where now you've demonstrated that you understand everything that you need to know. When you get certified as an arborist, by taking and passing that exam, you have demonstrated a base foundation of knowledge that's by no means all there is to understand about the industry. So I hope that helped, in spite of, me not having, a ton of experience to provide. So with the couple minutes we have left, anybody have any thoughts, questions, or anything to share on that? Get your CEU stuff going in the chat, please. I'm surprised I took 90 minutes to cover that. I was a little worried about whether I had enough to contribute there. So
we kind of used like 10 minutes at the beginning.
Yeah.
But you're still very close.
Any last thoughts or questions? Joke. Yeah, Scott mentioned the snow that's coming to the panhandle, and I hear some pretty crazy forecasts for potential quantities of that. We'll keep our fingers crossed that it's not too much snow, but wind, snow, and ice are certainly nature's way of pruning trees in their own way. All right, everybody. Kent, I did get your note about not being able to get on the chat, so we'll be sure that your CEU information gets entered as well. Thanks, everybody.
No.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say really quick, if you have not put in the chat that you are going to apply for the scholarship, even if you've been in contact with Graham and I, please go ahead and just throw that in there so that way we just know. And you just type in scholarship and that's fine. That gives us an idea.
Yep, we'll leave the Zoom open for a minute or two so you can put anything you need into the chat. And thanks for joining us through this series. I probably won't see any of you guys for the evening session, but it's been great having you along, and your contributions and questions have really been helpful for everybody.
All right, everybody. You guys have a good afternoon. We'll see ya.
Bye-bye.